People think the fires you remember are the ones on the news. Skyscrapers, tankers, whole city blocks. Big, loud, impossible to ignore. But the fire I still see when I close my eyes started on a quiet winter night in a little white church at the edge of town. We called it New Hope Chapel. Everybody else just called it the church. If you were born there, they probably carried you through those doors within a week. If you grew up there, you went to Sunday school in the basement, drank weak coffee out of foam cups, and stood on those steps in your best clothes at least once. Wedding, graduation, something. If you died there, well, your last trip out of those doors was in a pine box with flowers on top. My name's Sam, but around town they called me Cap Sam, once I had the white helmet. I spent most of my adult life at Station 47, and New Hope was woven through all of it. My wife and I were married there. I stood in the back pew the day my old partner's flag-draped casket went down that center aisle. I watched my daughter teach a bunch of squirming kids how to sing "This Little Light of Mine" up near the altar. That building had seen me in a cheap rental tux, in dress blues, in a wrinkled suit I'd slept in after a night shift. So when the tones dropped that night and I heard the address, it hit me different. It was just after midnight, deep in January. The kind of night where the snow squeaks under your boots and the air cuts your lungs. We'd finished a frozen sprinkler job across town and drifted into that half-sleep you get at the station. TV murmuring, gear laid out beside the bunk, boots pointed toward the future. The coffee pot was down to that burnt layer at the bottom. Somebody had left a deck of cards face up on the kitchen table. Mike was snoring in his recliner. Ty had his hoodie over his eyes. The bay lights were dimmed, rigs sitting there like big red dogs waiting for a whistle. Dispatch came over the speakers, sharp and too loud in the quiet bay. Station 47, Engine 1, Ladder 1, respond for a reported structure fire. Possible church, New Hope Chapel, 12 Maple Ridge Road. Multiple callers reporting flames visible. Time of tone, 0014. It took me a second to process possible church. When New Hope Chapel followed, my brain gave a little jolt, like a misfiring plug wire. For half a heartbeat, my mind tried to argue with it. Churches don't burn, it said, like there was some rule about that. Then the rest of the sentence caught up with me. Multiple callers, flames visible, and the argument was over. I was on my feet before the tones finished, grabbing my bunker pants, stepping into them by feel. Let's go, I called, more to whatever was twisting in my chest than to the crew. Mike jerked awake, already reaching for his suspenders. He'd been with me 15 years, the kind of guy you don't have to look at to know where he is on a scene. Tyler came out of the bunk room half-dressed, hair sticking up, trying to look braver than he felt. First real working fire of the winter for him. First one that wasn't a dumpster or an empty garage. "What's the address?" he asked, voice still thick with sleep. "Maple Ridge," Mike said, already knowing what that meant. His eyes met mine for half a second. We didn't say the church. We didn't have to. We climbed into Engine 1, the diesel rumbling to life under us. I slid into the officer's seat, headset already on, radio mic under my gloved fingers. The bay door rolled up, letting in a sheet of black sky and falling snow. Out there, somewhere, was a building that had been part of my life longer than some of the firefighters riding with me. "County, Engine 47-1 responding," I said. "Show ladder 47-1 en route as well." came the driver's voice from the ladder behind us. I acknowledged and hit the siren. The engine eased out onto the street. Then we were moving, tires chewing through packed snow, the world outside reduced to a tunnel of headlights and swirling flakes. Town at night in winter looks like a different place. Stores dark, houses glowing soft yellow behind curtains. Christmas lights still up on a few porches, stubborn against the calendar. Everything muffled, like someone threw a blanket over the world. As we headed up Maple Ridge, a faint orange smear appeared on the clouds to the east. It's a thing you never get used to seeing, no matter how many years you do the job. The sky lit from below by fire. "You seen that, Cap?" Mike asked as he buckled in, nodding toward the windshield. "Yeah," I said. "She's working." Tyler tried to sound casual. "Maybe it's something behind the church," he said. "Like a shed or something." Nobody answered. Mike reached behind his seat, flicking on the floodlight controls by habit. I glanced at the thermal imager hanging from the dash, the scissors, the little plastic crucifix some long-gone driver had left taped there. In this line of work, you learn to read the little signs. By the time we crested the last hill, we didn't need the sky to tell us where we were going. The whole horizon in that direction pulsed with firelight. "Oh, man," Tyler breathed, pressing a gloved hand to the dash. "Is that—" "Eyes on your gear," Mike told him, but he was looking too. As we came around the final bend, New Hope came into view. The church sat back from the road on a low rise, a simple wooden building painted white, steeple pointing up like a finger to heaven. I'd seen it in morning light, in rain, decorated with flowers, wrapped in lights for Christmas Eve. I had never seen it like that. Flames poured out of the front doors and windows, chewing at the old siding like it was paper. The stained glass glowed from within, colors twisted and sick in the orange wash. Flames licked up under the eaves, racing along the roof toward the steeple. Snow all around reflected the light, so that the whole hill looked like it was on fire. Trees, old gravestones, the icy parking lot. The steeple rose above it all, black smoke pouring out around the base, bell tower lit from below like something out of a painting. For a second, it didn't look real. It looked like one of those oil canvases they hang in museums, beautiful and terrible at the same time. Then I saw the cars, 3 of them nose in along the little loop of driveway, half buried in snow, engines off. Tunes of tire tracks showed somebody had come in recently. Fresh footprints led away from the nearest one. "Cap, we've got vehicles," Mike said quietly. "Yeah," I answered. "We treat it like they're occupied until we prove otherwise." I keyed the radio. "County, 47 is on scene. We've got a working fire at New Hope Chapel, fully involved sanctuary, heavy fire showing from the A side, flames through the roof, multiple vehicles in the lot, unknown occupancy. We'll be in rescue mode, establishing water supply." The words came out smooth. They always did. But my heartbeat was pounding so hard, I could feel it in my teeth. My mind flashed images without my permission. Pastor Ray's old tan Buick, Miss Ida's little blue sedan. It was hard to tell in that flickering light, but every shadow looked familiar. We stopped short of the closest car. Snow steamed under the engine as we parked. "Hydrants back at the corner," I said. "Mike, Ty, pull 1 3/4 inches to the front. I'll size up, see if anyone's outside. Ladder's a few minutes out. We're it for now." We spilled out into the cold. Heat punched me in the face before the air did. A solid wave even through the open coat, and the mask hanging at my chest. The smell hit next. Burning. Pine boards, old varnish, hymnals, and candle wax. There's a particular scent to a church burning. You don't forget it. I jogged up the shoveled path toward the front steps, scanning the snow. No one on the ground, no one stumbling away. No silhouettes in the glow, just the roar of the fire and the occasional pop of glass blowing out. Off to the side, by the ramp, I saw movement, a shadow detaching from the darker line of bushes. "Fire department," I yelled, voice cutting through the noise. "Call out." A figure staggered toward me, a woman in a heavy coat, scarf half off, breath puffing. Her hair was wild, eyes wide and reflective in the firelight. It took me a second to recognize her. "Diane," I said. She helped with the choir, always in a green sweater on Sundays, always brought deviled eggs to potlucks. Tonight she looked like she'd been dragged through a storm. "Sam," she gasped, clutching at my sleeve. "Ray's still inside. Pastor Ray." We were finishing up the hymn books in the back, and the lights flickered, and there was this sound, like a pop, and then she threw a hand toward the inferno. The whole wall just lit up. He went back for something, I don't know what, and the smoke. Her words tangled. Tears had frozen on her cheeks in irregular tracks. "Okay," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "You did the right thing coming out. Anyone else inside besides Pastor Ray?" She squeezed her eyes shut, thinking. "I think Mrs. Evans left already. She said she had to take her pills, you know how she is. It was just us by the time I noticed the smoke. He told me to run and call. I did. I swear I did." "You did good," I said. I gave her arm a firm squeeze. "Medics are on the way. Stay by the road, away from the building. Don't go back up here, no matter what you think you hear. We're going to look for him, okay?" She nodded, though I could see in her eyes she wanted a different promise. There's a temptation to say, "We'll get him out." I learned early in this job not to make promises I couldn't keep. "We're going to do everything we can," I said instead. "Now go, warm up, keep yourself safe." She let go, stumbling back toward the drive, turning every few steps like maybe she could help just by watching. Behind me, Mike and Tyler had the first line flaked out up the steps, nozzle pointed at the inferno of the open front doors. Fire rolled along the ceiling just inside, curling out over the entry like it was trying to escape the building every time a window let go somewhere along. The side, a sheet of flame, punched out into the night. You don't run into a fire just because the door is in front of you. You read it. You feel it. Years on the job teach you what different kinds of fire sound like, how they move, how a building breathes when it's in trouble. The front entrance of New Hope was breathing hard. "We're not going through that front door," I said, raising my voice over the noise. "You see that roll? That's looking to flash. We'd be cooked before we hit the center aisle. Back it down." Tyler looked disappointed and a little relieved. "So where?" "Side entrance by the fellowship hall," I said. "Less fire showing there. We'll try to make the sanctuary from the back. Sweep as we go. But we're listening to this roof. You got me? First crack or groan that feels wrong, we're out, with or without him." They both nodded. That's the thing about experience. It teaches you survival, but it also teaches you exactly what it feels like to gamble with somebody's father, somebody's pastor, somebody's friend. We hauled the line back down the front walk, boots sliding a little on the slick snow. As we rounded the corner into the side yard, the picture changed. This side had always been quieter. On summer Sundays, kids hunted Easter eggs back here, while the grown-ups drank coffee. Now smoke pushed heavy out from the eaves. But the windows along the fellowship hall glowed without visible flames blowing out yet. The door was closed, a plain metal thing with a narrow glass pane. Through it I could see thick smoke banked down inside, but the fire itself seemed farther away. It was a window, and not a big one, but it was what we had. Ladder 1 crackled over the radio that they were 3 minutes out. I told them we were making an interior attempt for a known victim and to secure a secondary line to protect the front. I kept my tone level, like we did this every day. Mike set the Halligan on the latch while Tyler aimed the nozzle just above the door. Ready. Mask up, I said, pulling mine over my face. The world shrank to the rubber straps at the back of my head and the hiss of air as I opened my cylinder. My exhaled breaths fogged the inside of the facepiece for a second before clearing. The green lights on my HUD blinked into place. The weight of the air bottle settled across my shoulders like an old friend. I could feel my heart rate steady just a notch. Gear is ritual. Ritual is control. On you, Cap, Mike said. I nodded. Crack it. Short burst. Sweep the ceiling. Watch. That's smoke. One good pry, and the latch gave. He yanked the door open a foot, and Tyler sent a tight stream of water high into the dark, just under the ceiling. The smoke rolled out over us, but the heat dropped a little as the water did its work. The fire fought back, hissing, but it blinked. That blink was our chance. We ducked in, staying low, hose snaking between us. Inside the fellowship hall, familiar turned strange. Long rectangular tables were overturned, chairs scattered, hymnals and sheet music across the floor like leaves. A half-finished jigsaw puzzle lay melted to a card table. The church's old coffee urn had blown its top. The metal was warped and blackened. Flames licked along the far wall where it met the sanctuary, trying to chew their way through. The air was thick with gray and orange, the exit signs glowing dim red through the haze. Every now and then a framed photo on the wall would pop as the glass cracked from the heat. "Ray," I shouted, my voice muffled inside the mask. "Fire department, call out." No answer, just the roar and crackle. We moved forward in a crouch, sweeping the nozzle in short bursts at the ceiling every few feet to cool the gases. The steam rained back down on us, turning the ashes underfoot into a paste that sucked at our boots. I could feel the heat wrapping around my ankles, creeping up my legs, soaked into my gloves. Somewhere behind us, another siren wound down as the ladder truck pulled up. A second line came in through the front, guarding that furnace of an entryway, keeping it from wrapping around behind us. We reached the double doors that led into the main sanctuary. They were half open, smoke pumping out of the gap like breath from a dragon's throat. The ornate wooden crosses carved into their panels looked almost black in the firelight. Tyler glanced at me. All I could see of him were his eyes behind the mask, big and bright. "Easy," I told him, leaning close so he could hear me. "Short look, quick hit. If it wants to eat us, we back out and rethink. We're not solving this whole fire in one shot." He nodded. I could see his jaw clench under the straps. We dropped even lower, crawling now, and I gave the left door a shove with my gloved hand. For a split second, I had a full picture of the room beyond, and it's one of those pictures that never goes away. The sanctuary was an orange tunnel, pews on either side like rows of teeth. The far end where the altar stood was a wall of flames, reaching up into the balcony and beyond. The big stained glass window behind it glowed like someone had stuck the sun behind it, colors lost in pure light. Fire ran along the ceiling in waves, rolling above us, licking the tops of the pews as it went. Blue and orange tongues chased each other, searching for fresh air to feed on. The wooden cross above the altar was still visible, black against the flames, floating in a halo of fire. "Upper layers," I barked. Tyler opened up, fog patterns sweepy across the ceiling. The stream met the superheated gases and turned to steam with a scream, a whiteout that rushed back at us. For a heartbeat, the fire pulled back, dark smoke taking its place. Then the orange punched through again, angrier. Somewhere beyond the roar and hiss, I heard a different sound, a cough. Off to the left. "You hear that?" Mike shouted over the noise. I heard it again, a wet, ragged hack, half buried in the crackle. "Left side, near the front," I said. Adrenaline sharpened everything. The weight of my gear, the hose under my glove, the temperature on my ears where the hood was thinner. "Stay low. We move on the left aisle. Short bursts. Don't outrun the line." There's a kind of calm that hits you sometimes in the middle of chaos. Later, sitting at the kitchen table, you'd ask about all the ways it could have gone sideways. In the moment, you just move, one step at a time. We dropped even lower, almost on hands and knees, and pushed into the sanctuary along the left-hand pews. The air near the floor was clearer, but not by much. My thermal imager showed a wall of white at the far end, too hot even to give a good reading. But off to the left, near the third or fourth row, there was a lump of orange-gray that didn't move like fire. "There," I said. We hauled the line with us, hose bumping against pews, water hissing in short, controlled bursts overhead. I kept one hand on the pews, counting them as we passed. Weddings, funerals, Christmas services, all of them lived in those boards. Now they were just landmarks in the smoke. The figure resolved out of the haze a moment later. Pastor Ray was half slumped against the end of a pew, one leg sprawled, the other bent under him at a bad angle. His clerical collar was askew, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. His glasses were gone. His eyes blinked owlishly in the dim. One hand was clamped tight around something pressed to his chest. As we got closer, I recognized it. The big old family Bible that usually sat in a place of honor on the pulpit. You could see the gold. Lettering, even in that light. That was what he'd gone back for. "Got him," I said. I reached for his coat collar, glove closing on the fabric. His eyes found my facepiece, squinting. "Sam," he coughed, voice shredded. You shouldn't be here." "You picked a bad night for overtime, Pastor," I told him, hooking his arm over my shoulder. "Time to go." He tried to drag the Bible with him, fingers locked around it. Mike gently pried, tucking it under his own arm. "I'll carry this," Mike said. "You hang on to him." Ray managed a ghost of a smile, then doubled over, coughing. The sound cut through the roar in a way that made my chest tighten. Behind us, the fire's tone shifted, dropping into a deeper, more dangerous growl. There's a point in every fire where it stops being a handful of smaller battles and becomes one big fight. The air changed, too. Pressure, temperature, the way the smoke moved. The building was telling us we were pushing our luck. "We're out of time, Cap," Tyler called. I didn't have to look up to know the ceiling above us was getting ready to do something we wouldn't like. Even so, part of me wanted to pause right there in the aisle. That stretch of floor had seen my wife walk toward me in a white dress, smile shaking. It had held the weight of my partner's coffin as the honor guard marched past. It had creaked under my own knees more times than I could count, during prayers I half believed and half hoped. Not today, I told myself. Today, you move. Back the way we came, I shouted. Stay down. Keep that stream working over our heads. We lose visibility. We follow the hose out. No hero stuff. We dragged Ray between us, his boots scraping on the hot floorboards. He was heavier than he looked. Unconscious people always are. Every few feet I checked the feel of the wood under my knees. Still solid. Good. A hard crack sounded somewhere above, sharp even over the roar, a beam shifting under stress. Then another deeper groan as something big changed shape. Faster, I said. We're going to lose that roof. Tyler did his job. Water driving the worst of the heat off us as we retreated. At one point, a shower of embers rained down from somewhere behind us, pattering against my helmet, bouncing on my shoulders. A piece of stained glass fell and shattered nearby, tiny colored fragments skittering across the floor like beads. For half a second, I saw blue and red and green on the charred boards, like a memory clinging on. We tumbled back through the fellowship hall doors just in time for the fire to throw a tantrum behind us. As Mike yanked the door shut, a blast of heat and black smoke punched against it like a living thing. You didn't need to see it to know something in there had let go. Maybe the balcony, maybe the attic, finally finding fresh air. Either way, I was grateful to be on the safer side of that kick. Outside, the night hit me like a slap. The cold air felt wrong in my chest after the furnace inside. The whole front of the church was roaring, flames now punching clear through the roof. Ladder 1 had their aerial up, big stream pounding at the fire from above. Another crew was setting up a line to protect the trees and the parsonage next door. Snow under our boots was a mess of footprints and frozen puddles. Radios crackled. Sirens wailed in the distance as mutual aid companies were dispatched. We carried Ray down the slope, a good distance from the building, and laid him in the snow. His face was gray under the soot, lips tinged blue. He coughed weakly, chest hitching. Steam rose from his clothes. The Bible lay in the snow beside him, pages smoking where the heat had curled the edges. Diane came running, nearly falling. "Oh, thank God," she whispered, dropping to her knees. "Oh, thank God you found him." "He's breathing," I said. "Medics are going to take good care of him." "The church," she choked, looking up at the flames. "Sam, the church." "Wooden nails," I said automatically. It's the thing we tell ourselves. People are what matter. Even as I said it, part of me winced, because I knew it wasn't that simple. For a lot of folks in this town, that building had been more than lumber for a long time. The ambulance pulled up, lights washing blue over orange. Medic slid Ray onto a stretcher, hooking oxygen to his face, checking his vitals, working with the practiced speed of people who had done this 100 times and still understood the stakes. Before they closed the doors, Ray grabbed my sleeve with surprising strength. "Sam," he rasped through the mask. "The bell." His eyes were insistent. "Let it fall," I said. "We're not sending anybody up there. You hear me? Nobody." For a moment, I thought he'd argue. Then his grip loosened and his hand fell back. The doors shut, and the ambulance eased away, tires spinning a little on the icy road before biting. With the rescue part done, the fire changed for us. It turned from a search to a siege. We pulled back to the collapse zone, lines repositioned to keep the flames from jumping to the trees. I stood by the pump panel for a while, working alongside our driver as he adjusted pressures and changed feeds. The valves were rimed with ice already, spray freezing as soon as it hit metal. Behind us, the crowd was growing, neighbors in boots and coats, faces lit by alternately red, blue, and orange. You could pick out the church members by their expressions. They weren't just watching a fire. They were watching years of weddings and funerals and Christmas Eve services go up in smoke. My wife's SUV slid to a stop at the roadblock a little later. She got out, pulled her coat tight against the cold, and walked up to the tape. Her breath puffed out little ghosts as she scanned the scene, finally finding me where I stood. Our eyes met across the distance. The look she gave me wasn't fear. Not exactly. More like a question. "You okay?" I gave her a small nod. Not a big one. Just enough. She nodded back, tugged her scarf up over her mouth, and stayed where she was. She'd been married to this job as long as she'd been married to me. She knew when to stay out of the way. Time got strange then, the way it does on big fires. Minutes stretched and folded. We chased fire wherever it showed its face. Under the eaves, in the base of the steeple, burning through the sanctuary roof. We swapped crews when their air ran low, knocked ice off hose couplings so they'd move, broke down and redeployed lines as the fire's shape changed. At one point, a gust of wind drove the flames sideways toward the parsonage, and for 10 minutes that little house was all we cared about. We stacked water on the wall facing the church, steam boiling off like a storm cloud until the siding dripped but didn't ignite. The steeple hung on longer than I would have believed. It towered above the inferno, sides blackened, little Gothic windows shooting out jets of flame. The bell up there, solid brass, hung in place when my grandparents were young, had rung for every wedding and funeral I could remember. Now it glowed dull red in the firelight, a dark halo around it, where the smoke wrapped the tower. "You want us to try to save that?" The ladder officer asked me over the radio. "We're getting some decent knockdown from this side." I looked up at the steeple. Every instinct I had wanted to fight for it. It was more than a piece of architecture. It was a landmark. When you came around the far curve into town, that steeple told you you were home. But the building was talking in other ways. The roofline had a sway to it, a slow wrongness that said. The trusses were giving. The flames at the base of the steeple weren't slowing much, even under the big stream. And if that tower went, it was going to come down in a way that could kill anybody standing too close. "Negative," I said, the word tasting like metal. "Pull the aerial back out of the collapse zone. Focus on protecting exposures and what's left of the fellowship wing. The steeple's a loss. I don't want anybody under it when it goes." There was a beat of silence. Nobody likes to stand down from a fight, but they also like getting home to their families. Copy cap, pulling back 10 yards. They retracted the ladder a few feet, adjusted the streams. The water hit the flames with that constant hiss that after a while starts to sound like breathing. Some of the folks at the tape heard me give that order. I felt their eyes on my back. You get used to that, too. Command isn't about doing the thing that looks most heroic. It's about doing the thing that gets everybody home. The steeple made its decision about an hour later. We'd knocked down most of the visible fire in the sanctuary by then, though hot spots still chewed at the debris. Snow was falling again, thick flakes hissing when they touched anything warm. The steeple stood there, outlined in dull orange from within, leaning just a hair more than it had at the start of the night. I was talking with the fire marshal near the pump when I heard it, a sound deep enough to feel in your bones. A long, low groan from somewhere overhead, followed by a sharp crack. "Heads up," I shouted, already moving. "Steeple's going. All companies. Clear the front. Move, move, move." Firefighters closest to the building backed up fast, dragging hose with them, boots slipping in the slush. The crowd at the tape pressed backward, too, instinctively. For a heartbeat, the steeple seemed to hang there, tilted, defying the math. Then gravity finished what the fire had started. The base tore free with a roar, sending up a shower of sparks. The bell fell first, dropping out of the belfry like a stone, falling through fireworks. It hit the front steps with a sound that went through my chest more than my ears. A broken metallic boom that seemed to vibrate in the cold air. The steeple followed, crashing down across the front lawn in a spray of embers and smoke. Snow exploded into steam. A few people gasped. Someone started to cry. Nobody cheered. On some fires, you'll hear whoops when a stubborn roof finally comes in and gives you access. Not that night. This felt too much like a funeral all by itself. We moved in when it was safe, pouring water onto the fallen timber, making sure nothing would sneak off into the trees. The bell lay half buried in slush, still faintly glowing, its surface scarred and blackened. I found myself walking toward it without really deciding to. I squatted beside it, steam drifting around my knees. Up close I could see where the impact had bent the rim, putting a crack through one side like a jagged smile. The snow under it had melted down to muddy grass. My gloved hand hovered over the metal, feeling the heat radiating off it. "Well," I murmured, too low for anybody else to hear. "You rang for all of us. I guess that's your last call." "Cap," Tyler's voice came from behind me. "You good?" I straightened slowly, my back complaining. "Yeah," I said, just paying my respects to the old girl. He looked at the bell, eyes wide. "I didn't think it would actually fall," he said quietly. "You always see church steeples just there, like they're permanent." "Nothing's permanent," I said. "Buildings, jobs, knees. Trust me on that one." I glanced back at the smoking skeleton of the sanctuary. What matters is who's standing around when it's over. Dawn finally started to bleed into the sky, turning black to dark blue to washed-out gray. By then the fire was mostly out, down to smoking piles of debris and the occasional stubborn glow that we'd cool with a quick blast. Ice coated everything, hoses, ladders, the branches of the trees. The rigs looked like someone had sprayed them with white shellac. We kept a crew there to babysit, watching for rekindles. The rest of us started cleaning up, rolling stiff hose, stacking tools, knocking ice off our coats. My mustache had frozen into stiff spikes. Every breath thawed and refroze them. People drifted away from the tape, heading home to get ready for work or school, or maybe just to sit at their kitchen tables and stare into their coffee for a while. A few stayed, huddled in small groups, hands jammed in pockets. At one point, Pastor Ray's adult son pulled up, eyes red, still in his pajamas under his coat. I watched Diane hug him hard, his shoulders shaking. The chaplain made his rounds, quiet words, a hand on a shoulder, a prayer, if someone wanted it. Before we left, the fire marshal asked me to walk the perimeter with him. Even in the dark, he was already cataloging possible points of origin. muttering about wiring and old space heaters and the way fire had vented. "We'll know." "More in a few days," he said, voice tired. "But I'll tell you right now, Sam, doesn't look suspicious, just looks old and unlucky." "That tracks," I said, though it didn't make the black hole in my chest feel any smaller. New Hope smoldered for 2 more days. Crews took turns checking it, turning over hot spots, making sure the buried embers didn't decide to wake up in the night. Then the heavy equipment came, and the part I hated most began. The taking apart. Excavators bit into the charred remains, pulling out twisted beams and collapsed trusses, loading them into trucks. They salvaged what they could: metal, some stones from the steps, the half-burned cross from over the altar. The bell got hauled away separately, on a flatbed, the crack in its side catching the sunlight. For the first time in my life, that hill at the edge of town was empty. It looked wrong, like a missing tooth. Life didn't stop for the church fire, of course. The next day, there were still car accidents and medical calls and gas leaks to handle. Pipes burst in the cold snap. Alarms malfunctioned. People needed us to show up for the usual human reasons. But for weeks afterward, every time we drove past Maple Ridge, I'd catch myself turning my head, looking for a steeple that was no longer there. My hands would tighten a little on the clipboard. Sometimes I'd feel Mike's eyes on me, just checking. "You ever gonna talk about that night, Cap?" he asked me once a couple of months later, when we were restocking the rig. "I mean, really talk about it?" "You were there," I said, sliding a fresh pack of batteries into the thermal imager. Not much to add. "We were there," he said, "but it was your church." I shrugged. It was everybody's church. He let it drop after that, but the question stayed with me. The investigation eventually pinned the cause down. Old wiring in a wall behind the choir loft, aggravated by a cheap space heater somebody had plugged in on an overloaded extension cord. A little arc, when nobody could see it, a slow smolder in the studs, a draft that pulled the heat upward unnoticed until it found something ready to go. Nobody's fault, really, and everybody's. The insurance folks did their dance. Forms, adjusters, numbers that made my head hurt. The congregation did theirs. For a while they held services in the high school gymnasium, folding chairs lined up on the basketball court, cross-painted on a bedsheet strung from the bleachers. The acoustics were weird, but the coffee tasted the same. On. The first Sunday after the fire, my wife nudged me before dawn. "We're going?" she said. No room for argument. I put on my dress uniform out of habit. When we walked into that gym, the whole place went quiet for a second. Not because of me, exactly, because seeing a line of firefighters in Class A uniforms made the whole thing more real. Pastor Ray stood at a makeshift pulpit, a portable oxygen tank parked beside him like an old friend. He'd lost some weight, and his voice had a rasp to it, now that hadn't been there before. But when he saw us, his face lit up. "Look at that," he said into the microphone. "Somebody call the fire marshal. We're over occupancy limit on heroes today." People laughed, a little wetly. Later in the service, he talked about Job and ashes, and how sometimes you don't get your why answered in this life. He said the church wasn't a building, it was the people. Then he looked right at me and said, "But I sure am grateful we had a building sturdy enough to give these folks time to get me out." Afterward, in the awkward milling that always happens after a service, people came over in little clusters to say thank you. Older ladies patted my arm. Kids stared at the badge on my chest like it might do a trick. One man I barely knew grabbed my hand in both of his and squeezed until the bones protested. "You brought my pastor back," he said. "I don't know how to repay that." "You don't," I said. "You just keep him out of burning buildings." It took a while for the talk to turn from what we lost to what we're going to build. There were meetings in the town hall about designs and costs. Some folks wanted to rebuild the church exactly as it had been, steeple and all. Others wanted something modern, with better access, better heating, more classrooms. I went to one of those meetings and sat in the back, listening. People argued over parking, over whether the new sanctuary should have pews or chairs. No one argued about sprinklers. Those were non-negotiable now. A few months before I turned in my gear for good, I drove up Maple Ridge on a rare afternoon off. The sun was high, the snow gone, the ground churned up by heavy equipment. Steel beams were rising where the old wood had burned. A crane swung slowly against the sky, placing another piece of the skeleton. The air smelled like dirt and welding instead of smoke. Pastor Ray came up beside me, lining on a cane. He'd aged 10 years since the fire, but there was still steel in his eyes. "What do you think?" he asked, nodding at the construction. "Bigger," I said, "stronger by the look of it." "Wider hallways," he said. "Elevator for the folks who used to dread those stairs. Heat detectors in every corner, sprinklers over everything that doesn't move. Our architect says we'll be the safest church in 3 counties." "You'd better be," I said. "I'm getting too old to crawl down that center aisle again." He chuckled, then grew quiet. "You know," he said, "I don't actually remember much after I went back for that Bible. Just heat and dark, and then you shouting in my ear, and snow under my back. That's about the highlight reel," I said. "You did pick a dramatic way to make a point about treasure in heaven. I'll give you that." He gave me a sideways look. "I've always told people sermons are more than words," he said. "Sometimes they're events, stories. Nights a steeple falls and a man with a white helmet pulls an old fool out by the collar." "You give me too much credit," I said. "That whole thing was hanging by threads. Could have gone the other way in a heartbeat." "Maybe," he said, "but it didn't. I figure God gets some of the credit. You and your crew get the rest." I didn't argue, but later that night I lay awake thinking about those threads, about the timing of the 911 calls, the choice to go in the side door instead of the front, the crack in the ceiling that made us hurry just a little faster, about all the fires in my career where the threads had snapped a different way. A couple of years after I retired, the new church held its official dedication. They invited me and the rest of the Station 47 crew to come in dress uniform. We stood in a row near the front, while kids in little suits and dresses carried in the new communion set, and someone lit candles on a brand new altar. The sanctuary was bright, high-ceilinged, full of light even on a cloudy day. The stained glass in the new big window told the story of a river and a tree instead of a cross on a hill. There were sprinklers tucked discreetly along the beams, tiny metal guardians nobody mentioned from the pulpit. Before the service, someone led us outside to a small stone pedestal by the walkway. On top of it was a glass case. Inside the case, sitting on a velvet-covered stand, was the old bell, cleaned, polished, the crack along its side still visible if you knew where to look. A brass plaque along the base read, New Hope Chapel Bell, 1923 to 2021. Survived the midnight fire. Below that, in smaller letters, let every toll remind us, not of what we lost, but of what we saved. I stood there longer than I meant to, hands folded behind my back. In my mind, I could hear its sound, the slow, solemn toll of a funeral, the bright peal of a wedding, the desperate, broken clang when it fell and struck the steps that night. Now it sat behind glass, harmless, an artifact. A lot of my life felt like that these days. Later, when the new bell in the new tower rang out for the first time, people wiped their eyes. The sound was different, higher, cleaner. Someone asked me if I missed the old one. I miss what went with it, I said, but I'm glad this one's up there now. Means we get to make more memories for it to ring over. People think the toughest part of this job is the blood and the flames, and they're hard, no question. But the real weight, the thing you carry into your gray years, is the knowledge that every building you walk into holds somebody's best days and worst nights. That little white church wasn't just boards. It was vows and hymns and goodbye kisses and whispered prayers. It was the place my wife walked toward me, and the place I saluted my friend's flag. The night it burned, we couldn't save the wood. Fire had had too much of a head start. We did save a man, and a book, and a bell, and a whole lot of memories walking around in winter coats at the edge of the snow. That's what I go back to when I wake up at 3 a.m. and smell smoke that isn't there. I see Diane's face when she saw Ray alive on the ground. I see kids lighting candles in a high school gym, singing a little off-key but loud. I see the cracked bell in its glass case catching late afternoon sun while kids run past it on their way inside. Fires end, even the biggest ones. Water wins, or the fuel runs out, or the walls fall in and there's nothing left to burn. But some nights like the church fire, keep a little ember going in you quietly, a pilot light you check now and then. Not so it can hurt you again, but so you don't forget what it taught you. So when people ask, Cap, what's the worst fire you ever saw? I usually tell them about a warehouse downtown, or a condo complex where we lost half a block. Those stories are easier around a crowded table. But if someone really wants to know, and they're patient enough to sit through a longer tale, I might pour us both a cup of coffee, lean back, and tell them about the night the church burned and the bell fell, and how, in the middle of all that loss, a handful of things somehow made it through.